People wonder if Congress once had a special napping room, like a room with bunk beds just for sleeping. It sounds a bit funny at first, doesn't it? But when you think about the people who serve in Congress, the long hours they work, and the history of the Capitol building, the idea starts to make more sense. It gets down to something very human, the need for rest. The question about a napping room in Congress is interesting. It makes you picture something specific, maybe a quiet space, dark, with rows of bunk beds, or a place where tired lawmakers could grab a quick nap between votes. A lot of people have heard stories about this kind of thing. Maybe a colleague mentioned it or it popped up in a history book, so did it exist? Was there a dedicated room with bunk beds for members of Congress to sleep in? The simple answer is not exactly how most people imagine it. There wasn't a sign that said napping room over a door leading to a dormitory. But the need for rest was very real, and members of Congress, especially in earlier times, found ways to get it. Think about how things were a long time ago. Going to Washington, D.C. was a big deal. Travel was slow. It took days, sometimes weeks, to get there from home. Members of Congress would leave their farms, their businesses, their families. They would travel by horse, by carriage, or by boat. There were no quick flights back home for the weekend. Once they got to Washington, they were there for the whole session. That meant months away from their own beds, their own homes. The city itself was much smaller. It was often a tough place to live. Finding good housing was hard, and hotels were basic. Sometimes, members even roomed together in boarding houses. Life in Washington was not luxurious for most. The Capitol building itself was different too. It grew over time, in stages. In the very early days, it wasn't the huge complex it is today. Offices for individual members, like we see now, didn't exist. There was no Rayburn building, no Hart building, no Longworth building. Members mostly worked out of committee rooms or even just on the House or Senate floor. They kept their papers at their desks. Their daily lives were centered right inside the main Capitol building. They didn't have a private space to go back to easily during the day. Legislative sessions could be incredibly long. Debates could go on for hours, even all night. Important votes might happen at any time. Their members had to stay close. They couldn't just leave and come back. If you needed to be there for a vote, you had to be there. This created a real problem. Where do you rest when you're stuck in a building for days on end? Where do you lay your head when the debate is grinding on into the early morning hours? The human body needs sleep. Even the most dedicated lawmaker can't function without it. So, while there wasn't a formal napping room with bunk beds, the need for sleep was absolutely there. And members found ways to meet that need. They used whatever space they could find. This practice really highlights the demanding nature of public service. It shows how even the most important jobs come down to basic human needs. The idea of a napping room, even if not quite real, tells us something important about the history of Congress and the lives of the people who served there. It's a peek into the practical side of governing, far removed from the grand speeches and policy debates. It's about tired bodies and the simple need for a moment of quiet rest in a very busy, very important place. So, if there wasn't an official napping room, what did members of Congress do? Where did they rest during those long late-night sessions? The answer lies in how the Capitol building itself was used. And it was more than just a place for debates and votes. For many members, especially in earlier times, it was almost a second home. Sometimes it was their primary home during a session. Consider the Speaker's room. This is a very old and important room in the Capitol. It's close to the House floor. It's where the Speaker of the House conducts a lot of business. Over the years, this room has seen countless late-night meetings and negotiations. It has also seen some rest. It's known that speakers, and sometimes other key leaders, would use sofas or comfortable chairs in this room for short naps. They would stretch out, catch a few hours of sleep, and then be ready to go back to work. This wasn't a dedicated napping room, but it served that purpose when needed. It was a convenient spot right in the thick of things. But what about other members? Not everyone was the speaker. Many members had less access to such prime spots. They often found informal places. Back then, there weren't individual offices for every single member. That's a relatively modern development. In the 19th century, members shared desks in large rooms or worked from committee rooms. These committee rooms were often equipped with basic furniture. They might have a few chairs, a table, maybe a couch. When a committee wasn't meeting, these rooms could become temporary rest spots. A member might lie down on a sofa or even just lean back in a chair and close their eyes. The Capitol building itself evolved a lot. Over time, more space was added, more rooms became available. But the core problem of long hours and the need to stay close for votes remained. As the building expanded, new areas could be pressed into service. Sometimes it was just an out-of-the-way corner. Sometimes it was a cot brought in for a special session. This cot culture is a real thing. It's not about a permanent room, but about temporary sleeping arrangements. A cot might be set up in an office, a cloakroom, or even a hallway during an all-night debate. Hideaway offices are another part of this story. These are small, often unmarked offices within the Capitol building itself. They are separate from the main congressional office buildings across the street. These hideaways are prized because they are so close to the House or Senate floor. They offer a bit of privacy and a place for quiet work or, yes, a short rest. While not specifically designed as napping rooms, their proximity and privacy make them perfect for a quick power nap between demanding sessions. They are a valuable retreat for members who need to stay on site but also need a moment of peace. So, the idea of a dedicated napping room with bunk beds isn't quite right. Instead, it was more about a series of informal solutions. The members adapted to their environment. They used the spaces available to them. They made do with what they had. Whether it was a sofa in the speaker's room, a couch in a committee room, or a temporary cot set up during a late-night session, the goal was the same: to catch a few hours of sleep. This was born out of necessity, not luxury. It speaks to the practical realities of working in government, especially in a time before modern conveniences and dedicated office spaces were common. The need for rest was a constant, and members found ways to meet it, often right within the historic walls of the Capitol building. The culture of long hours and exhaustion in Congress is not new. It's part of the job. The legislative process is demanding. It always has been. Even in the earliest days of the Republic, lawmakers faced incredible pressure. They had to debate complex issues, they had to compromise, they had to vote, and sometimes these processes stretched on and on. Imagine a critical debate happening on the House or Senate floor. It might be about a war, a new tax, or a major change to how the country is run. These aren't quick decisions. Members would stand up and speak for hours. Other members would listen, take notes, and prepare their own arguments. Sometimes, to prevent a bill from passing or to force a vote, members would engage in filibusters. This means talking for a very long time. Hours would pass, then more hours, sometimes days. During these extended debates, members on both sides had to be present. They had to be ready to respond. They had to be there for a vote if one was called. This meant being tethered to the Capitol building. You couldn't just go home to your bed. You had to stay close. If a vote was called, you had to be there to cast your ballot. Missing an important vote could have big consequences. It could change the outcome of a bill. It could affect your standing with your party. It could even affect your ability to get reelected. The pressure was constant, so members developed coping mechanisms. One of the most common was simply finding a quiet spot to rest. As discussed, this wasn't a dedicated napping room. It was more improvised. They might use a comfortable armchair. They might lay down on a sofa in a committee room. Some accounts even talk about members using their desks on the House or Senate floor as makeshift beds. They would put their head down, maybe drape a jacket over themselves, and try to catch a few hours of sleep right there in the chamber. It sounds uncomfortable, but it was often the only option. The lack of private offices contributed to this. When you don't have your own dedicated space, every common area becomes a potential resting spot. Cloakrooms, which are rooms near the chambers where members can store their coats and personal items, were often used for this purpose. They offered a bit of privacy and quiet. Some even had benches or old chairs that could be pushed together. These were not fancy places, they were practical. The cot culture is a very real part of congressional history. During periods of intense legislative activity like budget negotiations or war debates, the pace could be relentless. Members would literally bring cots into the building. These portable beds could be set up in almost any available space. An empty office, a corner of a large room, even sometimes a hallway if it was out of the way. The goal was simply to get some horizontal rest. It wasn't about comfort, it was about survival. It was about making sure you were alert enough to do your job when the time came. This whole situation speaks to the deep commitment many members had to their work. They were willing to sacrifice personal comfort. They were willing to push themselves to the limits of physical endurance. They did this because they believed in the importance of their role. They believed in the legislation they were debating. They understood the weight of their responsibilities. The need for rest, even if it meant sleeping on a cot in a hallway, was a simple human response to an extraordinary demand. It shows us that even in the grand halls of power, the basic human need for sleep cannot be ignored, and people will find a way to get it, no matter how inconvenient or uncomfortable. This culture of long hours and makeshift rest is a quiet but important part of the story of Congress. The idea of a napping room might have evolved over time, partly because of places like the Speaker's Lobby. The Speaker's Lobby is a large room directly behind the House chamber. It's a busy place. Members gather there to talk, strategize, and sometimes just take a break. It's often filled with reporters, too, trying to catch a quote. But it also has comfortable couches and chairs, and yes, members have been known to use these for a quick nap. The Speaker's Lobby is famous for this. During late night sessions or even long daytime debates, you might find a member stretched out on a sofa. They might have their jacket over their face. They are catching a few minutes of sleep. It's not a private space, but it's close to the action. It lets them be available for votes. This public napping, in a way, shows just how exhausted members can get. It also shows a certain practicality. They can't leave the building, so they make do with what's available. Over the years, the facilities for members of Congress have certainly improved. The Capitol complex grew. New office buildings were constructed across the street from the main Capitol building. These buildings, like Rayburn, Longworth, and Cannon for the House, and Russell, Dirksen, and Hart for the Senate, provide individual offices for every member. These offices are where members and their staff do most of their daily work. They offer privacy. They offer a place to keep personal belongings. And, yes, they offer a place for a nap. Many members now have small sofas or even cots in their private offices. This means they don't have to sleep in public lobbies anymore. They have a dedicated space, even if it's just a small couch in their office where they can close the door and get a few minutes of quiet rest. This is a big change from the early days when offices were scarce or non-existent. The hideaway offices within the Capitol building itself also remain popular for this reason. They offer the ultimate convenience, a private space just steps away from the floor. But even with these improvements, the demanding schedule remains. Legislative sessions can still go late into the night. Important votes can still happen at odd hours. Members often fly back and forth from their districts. This travel adds to their exhaustion, so the need for quick rests, power naps, still exists. It's just handled differently now. The press and the public sometimes comment on members napping. There can be a perception that it looks lazy, but often it's a sign of extreme dedication. It shows that the member is so committed to their work that they are staying on site, even when their body is screaming for sleep. They are choosing to rest in the Capitol rather than going home so they can be ready for the next vote or debate. It's a sign of the grind. So, while the image of a communal napping room with bunk beds might be a myth, the underlying truth is real. Members of Congress have always needed places to rest. They still do. The evolution of the Capitol complex and the availability of private offices have changed how that rest is achieved. But the demand for it, born from the intensity of legislative work, has not gone away. The Speaker's Lobby, hideaway offices, and even a simple couch in a member's own office continue to serve this very human need. It's about balancing the relentless pace of public service with the basic requirement for a functioning body and mind. The story of congressional rest, or the lack of it, really matters. It goes beyond just a curious historical fact. It touches on important issues like work-life balance, the stress of decision-making, and the health of our leaders. When we talk about members of Congress needing to nap, we are talking about human beings under immense pressure. Think about the decisions these individuals make. They vote on laws that affect millions of people. They decide on matters of war and peace. They manage huge budgets. These are not trivial tasks. They require clear thinking, sharp minds, and careful consideration. Someone who is severely sleep-deprived cannot perform at their best. Exhaustion can lead to mistakes, it can lead to poor judgment, it can make people irritable, less patient, and less willing to compromise. In a job where compromise and careful deliberation are key, sleep deprivation can be a real problem. The public's view of congressional work is often complex. People see politicians on TV giving speeches or in formal settings. They might not always grasp the long hours, the constant travel, the never-ending schedule of meetings and votes. The image of a member napping on a couch might seem out of place, but it's a stark reminder of the sheer amount of work involved. It shows that public service, especially at this level, is not a 9-to-5 job. It often demands round-the-clock attention. The need for rest also highlights the human element of government. Sometimes we forget that politicians are just people. They have families, they get tired, they get stressed, they have physical limits. Understanding this can help us have a more realistic view of how government functions. It's not just about grand ideas and policies. It's also about the very human effort of the individuals trying to make those ideas into reality. And sometimes that means finding a way to get an hour of sleep in a busy building. This enduring need for rest in Congress reflects a broader societal challenge, finding balance in demanding professions. Many people in high stakes jobs, whether in medicine, finance, or other fields, struggle with long hours and the pressure to perform while exhausted. The congressional napping room story, even if largely mythical in its specific details, becomes a symbol for this universal struggle. It shows that even in the highest levels of power, basic human needs cannot be ignored. Ultimately, the question of a napping room in Congress is more than just a piece of trivia. It tells us about the history of the Capitol, the evolution of working conditions for lawmakers, and the relentless demands of public service. It reminds us that behind every vote and every debate are human beings trying to do their best, often while fighting off the natural need for sleep. Whether it was an old couch in a committee room, a cot in a hallway, or a modern day sofa in a private office, members of Congress have always found a way to rest. And they will likely continue to do so because the job demands it, and because they are, after all, only human. The need for a quiet moment, a few hours of sleep in the midst of the nation's business, is a timeless and fundamental part of the story of Congress.